Hello and welcome to Baiju's IAS. Let's take up the daily quiz for today. The first question: which of the following statements are correct? After enacting a law, the Parliament can delegate to the executive the powers of drafting the regulations, rules, sub-rules, and bylaws for operationalizing the legislation. The Parliamentary Committee on Subordinate Legislation scrutinizes and reports to the respective houses whether such delegated powers are being properly exercised by the executive within the scope of such delegation. Both the given statements are correct, and hence option C is the right answer. See, after passing a bill, the Parliament can delegate lawmaking powers to the executive in order to allow the executive to draft the specific regulations, rules, sub-rules, and bylaws under the legislation. This form of legislation is known as subordinate legislation. It is referred to as subordinate legislation because in this case, the laws are being drafted by the executive, which is a subordinate authority to the Parliament as far as lawmaking is concerned. Because with regard to lawmaking powers, the Parliament is supreme, and the Parliament can delegate these powers to a subordinate authority, that is the executive, to draft the specific rules, sub-rules, and bylaws. Such subordinate or delegated legislation serves two purposes. One, it allows the Parliament to save its precious time and focus on other bills and other crucial issues. And two, it provides for specialization and expertise which might be needed while drafting the specific rules and sub-rules under a particular law. In certain cases, the Parliament alone may not possess such level of expertise, and hence the powers can be delegated to the executive to bring in the expertise while drafting specific rules and sub-rules. But in order to ensure that the executive doesn't breach its mandate, the Parliamentary Committee on Subordinate Legislation has been set up in the Lok Sabha and as well as in the Rajya Sabha. This parliamentary committee consists of 15 members who are nominated by the Speaker, and this committee doesn't include any minister of the government. This committee is responsible for reporting to the respective houses whether such delegated powers are being exercised properly by the executive and within the scope of such delegation. This question on subordinate legislation was asked because according to this article in the Hindu, the Union Home Ministry has informed the Lok Sabha that foreigners who have been covered under the Citizenship Amendment Act can apply for Indian citizenship once the appropriate rules are notified by the centre. See, the Citizenship Amendment Act came into force from January 2020 after it was passed by the Parliament in December 2019. And for drafting the specific rules under this law, the Parliament has delegated the responsibility to the government, and the committees on subordinate legislation of the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha have granted time up until April and July 2021 respectively. And once these rules are drafted and notified by the centre, then the Act will come into full operation. Now let's look at the second question. Consider the following statements with regard to the National Commission for Backward Classes. It was initially constituted as a statutory body in 1993. Presently, it has been accorded constitutional status through the 102nd Amendment Act, which has inserted Article 338B for the purpose. It functions under the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. The commission consists of a chairperson, vice chairperson, and 3 other members appointed by the president. Amongst the given statements, the third statement is incorrect, so option B is the right answer. See, the National Commission for Backward Classes was set up as a statutory body in 1993 through the National Commission for Backward Classes Act. But recently in 2018, the 102nd Amendment Act was brought in to amend the Constitution in order to provide constitutional status to the National Commission for Backward Classes. For this purpose, Article 338B has been introduced into the Indian Constitution. The composition of this commission includes a chairperson, a vice chairperson, and 3 other members who are appointed by the president, but it functions under the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment and not the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. And hence, option B would be the correct answer. This question has been asked in relation to the ongoing case of the Supreme Court over the percentage of reservation to be provided in education and jobs, where the Supreme Court has sought the opinions of state governments on whether the 50% reservation cap that was laid out under the Indira Savni judgment can be breached in order to provide for social justice to the backward classes by extending the percentage of reservation in education and jobs. This topic is covered in this article in the Hindu, and it makes a reference to the 102nd Amendment Act of 2018, which granted constitutional status to the National Commission for Backward Classes. Through this amendment, the President of India has acquired the powers to notify the backward classes in states and union territories after consulting the governors of the respective states. Then it also empowers the Parliament to amend the central list of backward classes. This is being seen as a breach of federalism, and a constitutional question has arisen whether the state's jurisdiction to notify backward classes and provide them with reservation has been curbed as a result of this amendment. Over here, I have even listed the powers and duties of the National Commission for Backward Classes, and I kindly request you to go through them once as it can be very important for prelims. Now let's look at the third question. Which of the following statements are correct? The sixth schedule of the Constitution protects tribal populations and provides autonomy to the communities through the creation of autonomous development councils that can frame laws on the subjects of land, public health, agriculture, etc. As of now, 10 autonomous councils exist in Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, and Mizoram. There is no panchayat system in the six scheduled areas. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article in the Hindu, the Home Ministry has informed the Lok Sabha that currently there is no proposal to implement the panchayat system in the six scheduled areas of Assam. See, just like the fifth schedule of the Constitution provides for autonomous powers to scheduled areas, which predominantly consist of tribal population in certain states, similarly, the sixth schedule of the Constitution also provides for autonomous powers to the tribal areas in four specific states, that is Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, and Mizoram. In the six scheduled areas of these states, autonomous councils have been set up, and currently we have 10 such autonomous councils. In Meghalaya, we have the Khasi, Jaintia, and Garo Hills Autonomous District Council. In Mizoram, similar autonomous district councils exist for the Chakma, Lai, and Mara districts. Even Tripura has a similar autonomous district council, and in Assam, we have autonomous district councils for the Dima Hasao region, Karbi Anglong region, and the Bodoland region. In the fifth scheduled areas to extend the Panchayati Raj system, the PESA Act was passed in 1996, that is Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act. But no such provision has been made for the six scheduled areas, and there is no Panchayat system as of now. So the Home Ministry has informed the Lok Sabha that currently there is no proposal to implement the Panchayat system in these autonomous district councils. Then apart from this, you should also know about the 125th Constitution Amendment Bill that was introduced in the Rajya Sabha by the government in 2019. This bill seeks to provide for elected village municipal councils in the six scheduled areas, and it proposes that the state election commissions will hold elections to these autonomous councils. Now let's look at the fourth question. Which of the following statements are correct? Sundarbans is a mangrove area in the delta formed by the confluence of Ganga, Brahmaputra, and the Meghna rivers. It is a transboundary ecosystem spread across India and Bangladesh. Recently, the Indian Sundarbans has been designated as a Ramsar site and is now the largest protected wetland in the country. All the three statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. See, the Sundarbans is a transboundary ecosystem shared between India and Bangladesh. It is present at the confluence of the Ganga, Brahmaputra, and the Meghna river systems of India and Bangladesh, and they form a huge deltaic area while draining into the Bay of Bengal. And this biodiversity-rich ecosystem is known for its mangrove forests. It has even been designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and recently the Indian side of Sundarbans, that is the Sundarban National Park in West Bengal, was designated as a Ramsar site under the Ramsar Convention, thus making it the largest protected wetland in the country. This question has been asked because according to this article in the Hindu, Union Home Minister Amit Shah has promised to protect and develop Sundarbans, which is often affected by cyclones in the region, while campaigning for the West Bengal elections. Now let's take up a question from the 2020 prelims paper. If another global financial crisis happens in the near future, which of the following actions or policies are most likely to give some immunity to India? Not depending on short-term foreign borrowing, opening up to more foreign banks, maintaining full capital account convertibility. Amongst the given statements, the first policy action would be the most appropriate to protect the Indian economy from the impact of any global financial crisis. Option A is the right answer. Because short term borrowing, especially the inflow of FII, can be very volatile, and by reducing dependency on it, you can shield your economy from the impact of global financial crisis. Whereas the other two options will increase your exposure to the global economy and will make India more vulnerable to the impact of a global financial crisis. Now, coming to the fact of the day, let's talk about the Indus Water Treaty, which has been reported in this article in the Hindu, because India and Pakistan have held the 116th round of Permanent Indus Commission, and this meeting between the Indus Water Commissioners of the two countries is being held after a gap of more than 2.5 years, and it is being seen as a wider part of the normalization of ties that is currently going on between India and Pakistan. Because back in 2019, following the Pulwama attacks and the Balakot airstrikes, India and Pakistan had suspended the meetings of the Permanent Indus Commission, which is mandated under the Indus Water Treaty. But over the last few weeks, several positive signs have emerged for the India-Pakistan relationship, with the joint announcement of a commitment to uphold the ceasefire, along with several positive statements from leaders of both the sides. Reportedly, this improvement in the relationship is a result of back-channel talks that are going on between India and Pakistan, possibly with the mediation of the United Arab Emirates. So in this context, let's understand the provisions of the Indus Water Treaty, which can be important for prelims. See, the Indus River system is a very critical water system for both India and Pakistan. This river system consists of 6 major rivers, including the Indus, the Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, and Satluj. Post-partition, naturally the sharing of these waters was disputed, and hence, to put this matter to rest and to work out a fair water sharing arrangement, India and Pakistan signed the Indus Water Treaty in 1960, which was drafted with the mediation of the World Bank. This treaty divides the Indus River basin into two parts. We have the western rivers and the eastern rivers. The western rivers include Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, and the eastern rivers include Ravi, Beas, and Satluj. Over the western rivers, India's rights have been severely limited despite being an upper riparian state, and roughly around 80% of the allocation has been provided to Pakistan. India has been provided limited usage rights over the remaining 20% of the water, and it is allowed to set up irrigation projects, run of the river power plants with very limited storage, and use the water for domestic non-consumptive purposes subject to several conditions. Whereas the eastern rivers have been largely allocated to India, and after India completely utilizes its share of the eastern rivers, the rest of the water is allowed to flow into Pakistan. So with this, let's conclude the discussion for today. Thanks for watching.